Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Oh, wow. I'm really running out of breath. It's hard to keep up with our guest running across the desert like this.
What's he running from?
Well, he actually is running with something. Something so odd and unusual, he better hurry before that storm catches up with him.
Well, come on, slow your ass down and come and join me in the KCOR studio so we can talk about this over the air like sensible human beings.
But Tim, who's a sensible human being amongst us anyway? I know you're not, and I'm questionable about whether I am or not, but I think our guests for the evening probably are. Well, let me climb onto the couch here and slow my ass down, and you introduce our guest, Tim.
Well, sure. Here, have a beer, Tim. There you go.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, just relax while I take care of this part here. Well, it's great that everyone is with us tonight on Exploring the Bizarre. So I should say that we have an interesting show. Hopefully, we'll end up having an interesting show because we're going to be talking about possible alien artifacts. So, I mean, that's an always a fascinating subject. So, first off, we have Harry Drew. Now, Harry has been on our show before and resides in Arizona and is highly regarded for his professional ethic, impeccable credentials, and trusted results as an old-fashioned Indiana Jones type of researcher who takes his fieldwork seriously. And, well, he doesn't rely on assumptions and has the uncanny ability to ferret out the truth no matter how it's been distorted. So now Harry, he's known for his research in the Kingman UFO incident, or actually incidents. I think there's more than one. And Harry has been associated with the UFO community for many years, and worked with Bob Brown as the official photographer for the International UFO Congress and Film Festival in Laughlin, Nevada, as well as with C.C. Stevens World Mystery Conference in Tempe, Arizona. Yes.
Yeah, C.C. Stevens, Wendell Stevens' daughter.
That's right. Hey, very good.
Yeah. She's been on the show. She's an old-time friend of ours.
That's right. Well, and I think possibly you know more, Tim, about our other guest. So perhaps you should make the introductions.
Well, I didn't want to get. If you notice in what we wrote up for the KCOR bulletin for the week's show, I tried not to give the punchline away. It's a very strange and odd case, one of the most peculiar that I've been involved in, and it includes meeting Mr. John PEELE, in, I think it was 1980 in Florida. And at the time, he owned, I think, a health food store or a restaurant, and had a very unusual artifact that he had located while jogging across the California desert. Now, I don't want to ruin it for our listeners. I would like him to tell the story himself. I have not talked to John since 1980. And it is really a bizarre story. And it is one of the few alien artifacts that we could actually point to as existing. I mean, we hear about Tim, the Roswell UFO crash and deceased alien bodies strewn across the desert, but there's very little proof, and I know that Roswell fanatics will go for the jugular on this one. Very little proof that any of that took place, or maybe it did, but it's certainly mysterious, and we don't have any of the artifacts. I mean, it's been claimed from time to time that there might have been an artifact found, but nothing that I know of. Now, Jacques Vallée recently, I think Tim has come out and said that he's found or come across some actual artifacts. Is that not true?
Yeah, it's a situation where he was talking about that it was material that's been collected over the years. That's undergone analysis, and apparently now he didn't give any direct references to which cases these this so-called alien alloys were found, but some of them at least were discovered quite a number of years ago, because he did say that considering the highly unusual nature of these metals, it would have been impossible and just downright just way too expensive to produce that kind of metal when they were found.
But he did say that all of the elements could be found here on Earth. They just consisted of what was the word that he used? More of the element than has been utilized in any particular case in the past. Now, in our book, UFO Hostilities, that we just came out with, we have a photograph of some metal that fell from the sky over Ubatuba, Brazil, which was analyzed at the time and was reported being very, very strange. And if anybody's interested in following up on that, they can, of course, get the book there. But I do want to start out with Harry this evening, and I want to start out by reading a clipping that he sent me. And the clipping is dated Thursday, June 29th, 1950. And it's a very, very peculiar a clipping, news story, and he's going to have to explain it to us. Now, Harry has been on previously, and we've talked about the UFO, well, he doesn't call them crashes, but UFO incidents, hard landings, soft landings, there in Kingman, Arizona. Anyway, let me progress by reading this short clipping. It is estimated that 14,000 to 16,000 acres have been burned over. 6 cattle have been found burned to death, and other cattle with burns which have been found are now being treated. A total of 440 men who helped fight the fire are recorded on the timesheets at an estimated $12,000 to $14,000 cost to the government, and county has been caused by the fire, the Bureau of Land Management reports. No guess as to the origin of the fire has been made, and it is still too early to make an investigation into the cause. According to the sheriff's office, no trace has as yet been found of the 3 men that Captain John A. Warren of the National Guard reported bringing to Kingman. The men boarded an ambulance in front of the hospital, according to Warren, and that is the last that has been heard of them. Now, there's a story there somewhere, I would say. So let's bring in Harry and tell us the story here, exactly what happened before and during this incident.
Before this incident?
Well, in other words, leading up to this incident of the fire.
Well, some local reports of seeing a disc come down and hit the north face of the Wallapai Mountain, which is 8,256 feet high, and it hit an area lower, about 16 miles from a sawmill, because it's covered with timber, and elk and cougars and all of that stuff stands up off the desert floor of the Hualapai Valley. And about 16 miles out from Kingman in an easterly southeast direction. And Kingman, 1950, is 2,800 people, give or take, and definitely a Mayberry-size establishment. And this happened on the 18th day of June, 1950, and it started a fire, and they actually got the fire under control. This whatever it was that fell started a forest fire, and but the smoldering coals weren't watched well enough, and this thing took off with the wind. It's common coming off the desert and hits the mountain, and where I am, some distance from there. And the fire began to rage enough that the Secretary of State for Arizona authorized emergency state help, and the 158th National Guard, Company H, assigned to it and to help here. And a Captain Warren, who you mentioned, was one of the National Guard people at the attending the fire. They brought in something important: walkie-talkies, communications, because there weren't any. And up in this area, other than a few residents up there now, there's still nothing to speak of. And the captain had been up resupplying things that have to be hand carried by work crews to the fire, which is moving around into the mountain peaks. And so it's all done by hand, no helicopters, no Bor-8 bombers flying over, dropping water, none of that. This is done with big metal tubs full of water with gunny sacks. You get them wet to beat the grass fire part out, and little pump tanks and shovels of dirt to try to handle a forest fire till you get a bulldozer in to cut a fire trail. So he's coming back down the mountain, and you pass what was a county park, is a county park still, as it turns out. And three men, well, some men, it turned out to be three, flagged him down. They were burned, one of them severely. They loaded him in the car. One of them looked like he was going to expire, put in the back. And the other two burned individuals sat in the front with the captain. Do you want me to take us all the way to the hospital?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Go for it.
Okay. They're 16 miles away, roughly, from the Kingman General Hospital, which was here, actually, up until probably about 5 years ago. And they finally demolished the place right along Old Beale Street and what we call Old Town Kingman, which 6 blocks of city, 6 blocks. No TV, none of these things. 1950, no, hardly anything. 2 roads, by the way. I'm going to make this clear for all the storytellers out there who can get it straight. Route 66, paved 1938, Kingman. And Highway 93. And 1 year before it was paved, 1951, and the south side going to a place called Wickiup was called Old AZ 93, and it was a graded dirt road to Wickiup, and went from there to Wickenburg towards Phoenix, and it was still a wagon road in 1950. So it's like not a highway at all. So with that, it's important to know how many roads, because that figures into this, really does. So the captain is going to take these 3 burned individuals down to the general hospital for medical attention because they're severely burned. And just as they approach the hospital, sitting out front is a vehicle, and the individual sitting on the extreme passenger side by the door, and the vehicle said, "There's our ambulance now." Okay. Well, the only place you're going to get medical treatment for at least 50 miles is right in front of them. And these are severely burned people, or individuals, we'll say. And they pulled up to a stop, and these things I'll let loose in my book, because this is on today, June 21, 1950, and the only newspaper stories that came from this was on the 22nd and the 29th, and each time there was less information until there's no information about what I'm telling you, even about what some of the things they printed. It was gone, taken out. The captain pulled up, and obviously he'd be wondering, why is there an ambulance parked out front? And why would it be connected to the three individuals in his vehicle? And he had them, the two that were conscious sitting up, he had them wait, and he got out of the vehicle, and he walked up to what looked like an ambulance, and he leaned over to the driver, and he said, "Who are you?" And the driver said, "Well, I'm the ambulance driver. I drive the ambulance to wherever we have to go." And the captain looked down through the window to the individual sitting in the passenger seat, and he said, "Well, then, who are you?" And he said, "Oh, I'm an intern, and I help treat the patient while the ambulance is en route." And the captain, it's like, it's a little spacey at that point. He accepted that, and he walked back, and he helped load the body of what he decided or determined was this other individual who had died during the transit coming down. And then the ambulance pulled away. And within a couple of minutes, Sheriff Porter, Mojave County Sheriff, comes screeching up to a stop in his Ford patrol car, along with the undersheriff, and he said, "Did you just bring the three men in to the hospital?" And the captain acknowledged he did, and he said, "They just left in an ambulance." And the sheriff looked at him and said, "They left in an ambulance? Where would they go?" So whatever the sheriff's motivation was at that point, this was the second time in his lifetime that I'm aware of from my research that something really screwy had happened to him. It would happen again in 1953. It happened the first time in 1947, a few days before Roswell. Okay? Another story.
Now, what did these was there anything peculiar about these individuals?
Well, their behavior was the two that were conscious, or at least seemed to be, were far more alert and more attentive than they appeared to be when he picked them up. You know, his expectation was suffering a lot of pain and some of the other things associated with burn injuries, and they were alert. The other man, individual, I can't say man here, I have a tendency, because that's thinking like the captain did. He had nothing to say at all, okay? And he remained silent. And so he, at that point in time, he was led to believe, or he imagined, that he had three men, and he picked them up at a kind of a flat area that sits back into the side of the mountain, which is the park, and he was transferring people below the fire. How they got there, and remember this: there's no telephones. Okay, you couldn't call an ambulance.
We're talking about Kingman. What was the population of Kingman at that time?
About 2,800 people. You know, maybe on Saturday. You know, they aren't all in town. You know.
Yes.
In the 6 blocks of Kingman, that's it, and it was called Bunchtown, and there were some isolated little farms and not really ranches per se, but some farms and stuff that as you go out, because this is desert country, and that was called String Town because it was strung out. So that was the designation from the time. No phones on the Hualapai Mountain. Okay. No phones as such outside of Kingman other than battery operated hand crank magnetotype with wire on an insulator nailed to a tree or whatever that came. One of them came into town. They had a real phone, and then they had like a prefix. You dial a prefix. You don't dial a number like you do today. Long number, just a few. And so somebody locally would take a call, and then they could call Sarah out in the country, and her ring is too long and is short.
Oh yeah, well we kind of had it like a party line.
Oh yeah, everybody.
Yeah. Well, we had that too. Growing up too. Now you pay extra for it as a social media thing.
Yeah. Well,
hey, but were they wearing? I mean, were they wearing any kind of protective outfits or uniforms like the firefighters would have?
Well, no, yes and no. They were wearing, and we'll see this again later. They're wearing some kind of coveralls. Coveralls weren't an unusual thing. You see a lot of them were back then, and they look like Levi's or something, and they come up and they've got a strap over the shoulder with a big button or something in the front.
Oh yes.
Yeah, but it became more clear to me in 1953 with that and what a reporter saw. These were flight suits, and but from the terminology back then, it's like there's some kind of coverall. Nothing that could identify. I guess it wouldn't be Sears and Roebuck existed then, if they happened to have a catalog, but it'd be probably something not even in the Roebuck. So,
but there would be no reason though why there would be an ambulance waiting for them at the hospital.
Correct. That's right. That's completely wrong. There are no. The nearest town is Needles, California. There's one individual who's an authority on Kingman, and he claims that he researched all the newspapers and within 100 miles of Kingman, even Las Vegas, about any kind of UFO or anything going on in 1953, and couldn't find anything. And I thought that's an overwhelming task, and of course I went and did that. There was only 2 newspapers. So it wasn't nearly as tough. And of course, there's front page stories.
All right, let me interrupt you here, Harry, because we have to go to our bottom of the hour break. When we come back, we'll continue this interesting conversation on exploring the bizarre.
Now back to exploring the bizarre with 2 of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal. Your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Wow, I am all pumped up, Tim. You can't believe this is a nights for me. We have, of course, Harry Drew on, who tells the magnificent experience that took place in Kingman, Arizona, and we have tonight as a special guest John PEELE. Now, I first met John PEELE. It was either 1979 or 1980 in Florida. I was down there on a promotional tour. At the time, I think I was editing UFO Review, our newspaper, our tabloid, and had a couple of books out. And so I would go around to long before Bud Hopkins and Whitley Strieber started, promoting the field. In fact, when they got into it, I kind of sort of backed out and let them take over. But I would travel around collecting information and data and reports from different locations as I visited different parts of the country. And my friend Karen Alt, I believe now, if I get John will have to correct me if he remembers, was a student at one of the schools down there, one of the colleges, and she had heard that somebody had something very unusual in their possession. And somehow I got a hold of John Peele's phone number and called him, and he invited me over to his house and showed me this, what I call an alien artifact. I don't know what else you would call it, and it took my breath away. It was just something stunning because there had been nothing like this before. Now I've told the incident several times, and a couple people have commented to me, "Oh, you're making it up. Where's the artifact and where is the witness?" Because I have not spoken to John Peele since that time in 1980, and I finally found him on Facebook maybe a little over a year ago. So I invited him on the show. And so this is, as far as I know, maybe the first time, John, that you have actually aired your discovery.
It is the first time that I've done that. You're right.
Well, good enough. Well, why don't we go back to I tried not even in our little introduction on the website, tried not to give too much information. I presented it as a teaser. Why don't you go back to your travels? You were jogging. Well, you were jogging across the California desert at that time, correct? Why don't you take us back to was this 1977?
It was 77, and we don't jog, we run.
Yeah, and if the heat
we were
is up,
jogging, we would have never made it. But it was actually in Arizona. We had gone.
Okay. Yeah.
One of the many things we did on that run, and it was from Daytona Beach to Santa Monica. But when we were approaching the western Texas side, we were invited to go to Phoenix for the Fiesta Bowl Marathon. I was honored and pleased that they invited us, but as I told them, I really can't run in a 26-mile circle. I'm running across the country, so I need to get, we were averaging out 48 miles a day, so it was a little difficult to do it that way. However, I did go there. We were like guest personalities and introduced, ideas of how to stretch and whatever for health and nutrition. That was what our goal was anyway. But when we left there, we didn't realize, because we were running cross country, we did not realize that we had actually entered into some areas that were pretty much protected, but no real protection, shall we say.
When you say protected, you mean like restricted area, government land?
Yeah, they were a restricted area. However, it was not restricted by any, it's like the border wall we don't have. We saw that as we were leaving more than as we entered. And so kind of neat things in Arizona out in the desert, literally running, and we kind of separated. Brian went his way and I went my way, which we did many times, because when you run side by side with someone for that many days, you kind of run out of things to say, so you go in different ways and you discuss it later.
Well, how many miles are you covering in a day?
The average was 48. I mean, the longest day was 68, but the average was 48 miles a day.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's pretty good. I mean, I'm not a runner at all. In fact, these days I have a hard time making it to the post office. But are we talking about running across the desert? There's a lot of sand there, and usually sand is pretty hard to run in or even walk in.
Well, actually, the deserts, when it's dry, is pretty easy to run on. The coolest part, there were road runners that would literally run beside you. But, it was kind of fun. But what happened was I came up on a railroad track that kind of looked like a roller coaster ride. It was pulled up out, and because the way railroads are connected to, one rail to the next, it literally made loops, and it was quite bizarre, and I did not know what I was seeing at the time. I'm still not 100% sure, but I went over towards that and started following it, and at one point I came up on a large what looked to me, and I'm a fighter pilot, so I say this with some knowledge, I saw what looked like a wing, but it was extremely thin. And even though it was about 8 feet long, I could literally use 2 fingers and from the end hold it horizontally with no problems. It was that light, but it was that strong. I mean, I tried to bend it. You could bend it, but you couldn't really. I wasn't trying to break it, but I was just testing it. I started to look around. I found other little, what I'll call remnants of what was an obvious crash. And at a certain point, looking at all these things, I mean, there was plexiglass, and it really was more like probably a carbon glass, because you couldn't break it. However, it had shattered from impact into the rocks in the desert, but you could pick up a piece of it and you could not break it. I didn't bring any of that. I was a little bit concerned that this might be radioactive. I didn't know what I was dealing with. And then I found the gloves. And you have in your book, MJ-12 and the Riddle of Hangar 18, you have a picture of that glove.
Yes, I wish I could find the. I took quite a few photos. I think we put the glove. Well, we compared the glove to a dollar bill, and then we put it in your hand. And I know I took other photographs, and they are here somewhere. But I have 50 file drawers of data and information, and I know that at some point I will come in contact with them. But okay. So you found an artifact. I mean, is there any other word we could use, or is that pretty much?
An artifact is good, because what that was, and at a later time, and I told you this when you met me down here. At the time, there were 2 of them, and so not knowing if it was radioactive and if I was going to have to at some point just get rid of this thing, I took one and put it into, I mean, it's a desert, so it may, I think it would still be there. But I put it into a little bit of a cavern under some rocks. And, of course, the markings that I did wouldn't be there now, but I visually had things that I still remember. And I brought the one that was in the worst condition, because I thought if I have to get rid of it, I would rather have the good condition one back here. I probably, in retrospect, since it worked out and I didn't have to throw it away, I should have brought the good one. However, the glove was made of some sort of a hide. It had a pressure valve on the outside, on the back, above the back side of the hand. The zipper literally worked from the inside of the glove. It had something very similar to Nomex, which is what we had as our, gloves that if there was a fire, Nomex would, not that it would keep you from burning, but it wouldn't melt on you. And the size, as you have pictured there, it was so small, there's no way that it could have been a human hand. And the way the thumb was, it was a prehensile thumb, but it was quite separated from the fingers. So it was very interesting. That glove, I actually had some people from NASA take a look at, and didn't think I was ever going to get it back, but they did bring it back to me, and they said they could not determine the origin of the glove.
Now, if I recall it correctly, John, were you not set to show that glove at a public exhibit at the opening of Close Encounters?
Yes.
Okay. And what happened there?
I'm not really sure what happened. This was before the age of cell phones and internet and all the other things. But it did not, there was some filming, but it didn't happen. There were several things that happened from the run. The story of Forrest Gump. They came and interviewed me in California, and then they came to my location here in Florida, interviewed me quite a few times, promised me the moon, never delivered any of that. did make a nice movie, and it's quite popular. And in fact, in a lot of places, people call me Forrest Gump because I use the articles from my run when I give talks on health and nutrition and motivation and inspiration. So that's kind of a nickname that they've given for me on all kinds of things. But the beauty of that glove was it was so unique, and I wasn't trying to do. I mean, in other words, I wasn't trying to gain anything from it. I was trying to share the glove. I mean, it wasn't like I was trying to make $1 million on the glove. I was so impressed with it, and it was so shared. And what we were doing was trying to raise money for health and nutrition companies, Linus Pauling and Hippocrates Health Institute and a few others. So it wasn't a matter of any of that. So I, in retrospect, I probably should have handled it differently, but it was not a part of the plan, so it wasn't. And it's just an impressive glove. I mean, when you hold it, it's like you understand that it is not from planet Earth. I mean, you can't look at that and see how it was made and see how detailed everything is, and yet there's no hand that would fit it that could be used for any particular reason that we know. And then
Well, there is a punchline for the glove. What is embroidered in the glove?
Ah, yes. When you say embroidered, you're not talking about words, right?
Yes, words. Yeah. Well, I don't know. I don't know whether it was written. I don't know how. I don't remember how it was put there. But
yeah,
tell us.
It was basically like a heat implant in the inside the glove was a bladder, a pressure bladder. That was what that valve on the back of the hand was, so that if someone put that on their hand, they could keep pressure on their hand in an outer space environment where there was zero pressure. Inside that bladder, below between the bladder was right below the leather, and then below that was the Nomex interior lining. And there were several things that were written, but they're not letters that I could actually read. There were emblems, and I'm sure that someone could read them at some planetary level, but I don't know exactly what they were. But it was just it was a phenomenal find. I mean, I don't even know how else to describe it except to say that.
Well,
it was so unique.
What was the word? The word that was imprinted there that you could read?
The only one that I could read was secure. That was
okay.
it.
Wasn't the word large there?
Yes, it was large. You're right. That had that too. And so, in other words, whatever race this came from, a glove that would have been 1/3 the size of my hand, roughly, maybe 40% at the most.
Yeah, and the dollar bill was bigger than the glove, or just about longer than it. Well, that boggles the mind. I mean, okay, even if it were possible that a glove could shrink, and I'm ask O.J. Simpson perhaps, but we're not, or O.J. Alien maybe, but I mean, like, it can't shrink that much, and even a first of all, you say, well, it did not fit the description of what a primate would or could have worn. But even if it was, how could you unzip it from the inside?
Yeah,
I mean, unless you could turn it inside out or something to that effect.
It actually on the zipper, which was on the inside, there was a pull lanyard, so you could use that lanyard, pull it on, and it kind of had the effect. At the time, Velcro wasn't something we really had. We did have it, had it on our flight gloves, but it wasn't something that everybody thought about. But it had something similar to Velcro, so that, for example, you could put a flight suit on it, and Velcro it to it. But prior to doing that, you could use that pull lanyard and close it up.
Mhm.
It's
Well,
pretty
now,
impressive.
wouldn't you? Well, I agree. More than pretty impressive. Darn right. Impressive, I would say. In this field, like I say, physical evidence, hard physical evidence of something like an alien artifact is almost impossible to come by and always in uh, dispute. I mean, there was something so strange and so peculiar about this that it almost sends chills up and down one's spine. But okay, so here's the glove. We don't know who it belonged to, but wouldn't you think that might indicate, since the words, or at least one of them or two of them, were in English, and it had 5 fingers, correct?
It had 4 fingers and a thumb.
Yeah. Okay. That. I mean, would an alien race be that close to us that they would have a glove and have 4 fingers and something else? It would indicate to me that we might be talking about something from the future or something from a parallel universe.
I've certainly given the parallel universe many, many, many thoughts. The idea of an alien is truly, when I was holding this glove, and first of all, there were 2 of them. So one was almost perfect. The other one had gotten a little bit, obviously from the crash, it had gotten a little bit, not really burned, but it had been heated and altered. And that's the one that I brought. But the other one was nearly perfect. And so they were basically the same size, so it didn't shrink. Unless they both shrank at the same time, which I somewhat doubt that could happen. I mean, maybe a few % from the heat, but I couldn't imagine. But what it seemed to me, anytime you see, even from any of the movies where they show the little alien creatures and whatever back, all that, it's always like they show the fingers that are longer, and the thumbs are further apart. The prehensile thumb is further back. And so it really looked like that sort of a small hand with fingers that were large for the hand, although small for the overall. It was just, even just to hold it. And I've been meditating since I was 11, and energy is very critical in meditation. You hold that glove and you could feel it. I don't know if you remember that, but even after all it had been through, when you held that glove, it had like an energy of its own. It was
We've got a break. We've got a break coming up in. We have a few minutes here. Okay, now, all right. So this is, like I say, one of the strangest things that I've ever come across. And I haven't talked to you since 1979 or 1980. That's a heck of a span. Do you still have the glove?
Unfortunately, I believe that the glove, I had a divorce. And it wasn't as divorces aren't, it wasn't very good. And a lot of things disappeared, and I'm pretty sure that went with the ex. She says not, but I'm pretty sure that's where it is. I have been wanting to go back. I have so many friends who say, let's go out there, let's get the other one. And I have not, but I
do you know where it is? Don't tell us the closest town, because there'll be 100 people out there to tomorrow. But do you know? Well, did you ever do any research on that railroad trestle or whatever that was?
No, because at the time, like I said, we had no internet. We had nothing that you could really do a search on. However, I am pretty certain that I know within I'll say within a mile radius, I could get right to that glove, and then I could find it when I'm there.
Well, we have on the other line here a man who lives, our fellow guest who lives in Arizona. I don't know how far that would be away. He's in the town of Kingman. How far that would be away, but maybe we can put out a message to the universe collect a few dollars towards transportation, unless you want to run.
I think once is enough for that.
Well, maybe if we could find a good charity to give the funds to, but I mean, we should find the other glove before it dissolves with the the sand and the ages and so forth. But now, was the object, the crash, whatever it was? I mean, do you feel that was something from outer space?
Well, I can tell you that knowing a lot about aviation, we don't have the plexiglass, and I think probably in retrospect it wasn't plexiglass. It would probably be more like a metal impregnated plastic, but you couldn't break it. It was blue, which we don't use in our aircraft windows. It was the wing portion that I found. Like I said, it was probably somewhere around 6 or 7, maybe 8 feet long. I don't remember exactly now because I never had a measuring device with me, but I know that it was taller than me. And it was so strong that literally I put it between 2 rocks and I sat on it. It would, a little bend, but it didn't collapse. I could hold it by using 2 fingers on one end. I could hold it at a horizontal position. And yet it was that size. So, we have our wings are made with, we have titanium, we have all sorts of materials that are making it strong but yet light, but nothing like that, nothing at all.
And how, now you saw just the wing, or do you think that was the entire object?
There was other pieces there.
Commercial.
I put the majority of the ones that I could collect to the same place that I put the glove.
All right, well, we've got a break here, and we'll be back in just a few minutes with our 2 guests for the evening.
Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe, exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
All right, welcome back to the second hour of Exploring the Bizarre. I'm Tim Swartz. Tonight, our guests are Harry Drew and John PEELE. And Harry, in just a little bit, I know that you probably have some great questions to ask John or other guests, but I wanted to ask you just a couple of things about the story that you were saying about the burnt men in Kingman. Now, this was not the first time that there had been some kind of out of the place men in that area. Am I correct?
That's correct.
What was the story that had happened a few years earlier? What was it like? Was it 1947?
Yes.
Okay. Why don't you tell us about that one, and whether or not you feel that there's any connection between the two?
There's a
two
connection.
Incidents here.
Yep.
Okay.
There's a connection with the 3 separate instances: the 1947, 1950, and 1953. And maybe 54, looks like. And I'm interviewing someone right now, a Century family member, for 1952. So it's like I can't keep up. I didn't expect really to find the thing for 53, but I found more than I could believe. Anyway, 1947, before Roswell, in the newspaper front page before Roswell, two men are coming back from Las Vegas. They've been at a business meeting and they're on a private aircraft, two-passenger. The pilot's a businessman and his partner. They're 600 feet above the ground. They're on approach to the airport at Kingman, which is no longer a military base. It closed forever in August 1945. Army Air Corps left, and it was handed over to Mojave County. So they're coming into the airport, and they're set upon by multiple UFOs to the point the pilot was flashing his lights, trying to get the craft to veer off, and they didn't. And they both expected that they were going to die. They were having air-to-ground communications with the Radio Shack because the tower had been closed since June of 1945, and everything that was in the tower had been removed, including the radar PIP screens. And the whole thing was just piled in a pile and destroyed. And so they had a Radio Shack. And the two guys in the planes, the pilot broke off from his approach on landing. And two of these discs came straight at him. And then I'm trying to think of the movie. I saw this in later. You have to remember, this is in the 1947 newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it isn't like they saw the movie 30 years later. And just before impact, each disc went out away from them and then closed back up again as they went by. Just like that. This is front page, and the Sparky or whoever there at the Radio Shack got a hold of a local reporter, and it wasn't that big of a deal to drive out. And so there was a reporter on the ground trying to talk to these guys. So they finally came around and made the approach again and landed. And it's almost like kissed the ground. Then they started asking, "Did you see any of this stuff?" You know, it's like, my God, yes. But these things came from, for us here, they came from the southeast, the east, okay? And the significance there is, I see AH-64 helicopters. They fly over my desert horse property where I am, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And the single file, and they're low, and they're loaded. Big rotor chop, okay? And how do I know that? I've been in them light and not. And Huey's the same way. I think probably John's been in a few Hueys. But, and they fly single file, low, come right over my property. I've got photos of all this stuff, shoot burst shots with an Icon. And I got photos that I never expected to get, and I've not shown anyone, but there are discs still, okay? And not blurry shots. These are like as clear as the helicopters. And they fly right straight to where the base is, okay? The old timers have since told me, pleaded with me and reasoned with me not to try to go there because of some problems and disappearances and people found dead and a lot of things. And for people to try to get to this place. Anyway, there had already been some things on the ground where it matched what was talked about in 1953, and they were, quote, strange looking men, unquote. Mm-hmm. And, it's like a reporter's description. So, they aren't out of towners. They would have been mentioned that way, along with Henry bought himself a new pair of shoes at the local shoe store because they talked about a lot of different things.
Oh yeah, small town newspapers.
Yeah, small town. I mean, it's like Charlie's cousin came to visit last weekend. Yeah, all these things. This is Mayberry, and for everybody that ever gets involved in history and doing research and that type of thing, you need to move mentally. You need to move yourself back to that time and stop thinking about using cell phones and computers and all of these other things. And these people were intelligent, and they were connected to the earth more than most of us are. Ranchers and farmers are pretty much that way still, but they lived a simpler life, and they didn't have all this technology. They'd have been overwhelmed with it, and in fact, this is part of it. They were overwhelmed by the technology because it was so far ahead of where we are now, let alone then. And so here we go. It's in the newspaper. It's on the front page. The pilot said he refused. He didn't want to talk. He said, "I'll just tell you this. I don't need no bromo." That's a quote. Bromo seltzer is like you've been drinking. Okay. I don't need no bromo. This stuff was like, and this is barely after Kenneth Arnold's claim, which was a day later than the reports made about the modern day first sighting. It just kind of expands and expands. Even on that, a personal friend of mine who is now deceased and business associate for years out of Pendleton, Oregon, interviewed Kenneth Arnold for 3 hours that evening on the 25th of June, 1947 at Arnold's hotel room. So and he had the radio station that Arnold was on the next day. So anyway, so I've been exposed to a lot of different things because of where I was and who my friends were and my profession, this kind of thing. And when I hear John,
you're a historian more than anything else. I mean, you don't claim to be a UFO researcher. You've investigated and done work on other historical things besides UFOs.
Right. I made an international newspaper, or I think it was an international. It was a national anyway newspaper in 1979. After it isn't like I haven't seen UFOs. There's a difference. It's like I was a museum director, and I'm not going to be talking about UFOs. And I saw one in 1979 coming up from the direction of Mount Shasta in the evening. And my oldest son was with me, and we're on the side of a mountain with a telescope. And this thing is the same elevation we are at. And it's lighting up the ground as it came. And I called the Air Force and identified who I was. They passed me to Seattle. I talked to the guy on the PIP screen, and I said, "I think this thing is going to go down around Diamond Lake, Oregon. It's headed due north." And he said, "No, it just went right by there. This thing is it's flying. It didn't fall. And it's gigantic. And it flew right by us at like eye level, looking off the side of the mountain." So it's like, I didn't need any convincing. My father's an archaeologist. So I kind of had, I was in digs when I was a kid, that kind of thing. So I take everything methodically, and sometimes too slow for some people, but there isn't an archaeologist I don't know that can walk away from a site without lifting that last rock to look under it, and so we find things. That's like finding the landing site with everything the Air Force left there in situ, never been touched in over 60 years, all the stuff that they left behind, including identifiable rare things that were under government contract made one time as an experiment. Boom, they're there. It's like arrowheads or the Clovis Point connected to mastodon hunters or mammoth hunters, actually. So with that, I listened to what John is saying, and my Uncle Irv, I was involved in some things that I don't discuss. And my Uncle Irv was involved in the space program and in heat shields and a bunch. In fact, developed and got a bonus internally for developing a heat shield that would work for like Gemini. And when you described this glove to me, were you talking about a zipper on the that was actually inside the glove?
Yeah, actually, it was not inside what would be very similar to our Nomex, although it was thicker. And crazily enough, I took a match and tried to burn a piece of that, and it wouldn't burn. So I know it was sort of a Nomex. But the bladder was inside the leather. The leather, and it could have been something other than leather. I don't know, but it felt like leather, looked like it. It was smooth on one side, kind of rough, grainy on the outside. So the smooth side was in. The bladder that had the pressure capability went into all the fingers and thumb and across the back of the palm. And then inside that was a string that would pull and zip it. And that would leave the Nomex on your hand. The bladder was there and it would close it up. But it was definitely an internal zipper. And it was pretty interesting. I mean, it wasn't like the zippers we have that, I mean, it did the same thing, but it was more, today, for example, if you were to buy some of the multicolored peppers, you'll find these little zippers that slip across and have no teeth, but just seal. And it was almost that sort of a thing, although it was much stronger, but it had no teeth. It just would seal it. You could pull it, and it would close it.
Mm-hmm.
To push it back, of course, at that point, it had been ripped off of someone's hand pretty much, I'm sure, but you could use your finger and slide it back down and open it up again.
Like a Ziploc bag almost.
Yeah, it was very different. And I mean, I had people from several of the space development teams look at that. Everybody was impressed. Nobody could decide where it came from, and they all said that it did not appear to have been made by anybody in a government contract. And the word large, if that was large, you can only imagine what small would have been.
Now, did anybody ever approach you? We hear stories of the Men in Black and people that try to silence UFO witnesses and people who have evidence. Anybody ever tried to make a grab for this thing or use any type of false ID to indicate that they were somebody that they really weren't?
I did not have that experience that I'm aware of. However, you don't know, but everybody brought it back. And I know it was the same one that came back because it's very unique. You couldn't duplicate that. But when they came back, they came back more than any other reason. No one ever brought it back at the time they said they would. They all kept it longer than they said, and I expected I was not going to get it back, quite frankly.
That's a rough call. I don't think I would have let that out of my hand.
Yeah. But they had IDs and identification that made me think that they were legit. But the real difference was when they came back, more than any other reason, they came back with that glove because they had more questions they wanted answered.
Mm-hmm. Anything in writing from any of these people?
Not a single one. I even asked that. I said, "Can you?" And they said, "No, we can't answer those questions." And they didn't have the answer. That's the point. And that's what was so cool about this glove. I mean, the people who would hold it, and Tim, maybe you remember, but people would hold it and say, "Oh, it's like my hands are tingling."
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Now, Um, what year did it disappear?
That would have been about 1980.
Mhm.
It was earlier than that you came down. It was actually, I think you came down in late 78, early 79.
Well, I sure would like to recover the photographs. Do you have any pictures?
No, I don't. Unfortunately, as I say, if that entire run had been done in today's world, I would have a whole lot more. The only reason I even have the newspaper articles about the run is because one of the newspaper reporters, Ron Black, over in Tampa, collected them for me.
Well, today you'd have selfies and everything.
Yeah, we'd have everything. But in that era, the news media would come out and interview us, and we kept running. The next day it came out, but we didn't ever see the newspapers. So it was really, I'm really very fortunate that Ron interviewed us before the run, and he started to collect them. I'm sure I could probably go online and get some of these. Somebody has said that, and I've thought that. I just haven't done it. Yeah. But I can tell you that glove, everybody who saw that, I don't want to say they freaked out, but they were freaked out. That's the best way to describe it. I mean, someone would hold that in their hand and it was like, oh, it's tingling. And it was. It was very interesting. And the other components from that crash site, and it had to be a crash site. That's the only thing that would do that to the railroad tracks and everything else. The metal, the plexiglass, and probably, again, it was probably more of a fiberglass with maybe titanium fiberglass. I would imagine that's probably what it was. But you couldn't break it. Now, it did break on the impact, but the largest piece I found was roughly about a 2-foot square, and it was very dark blue. It's not like anything we use in our aviation world, military or civilian. But if you held it up to the sun and tried to look through it, it almost became kind of like clear that you could see the sun, but the sun didn't impact your eyes in any kind of way. It was very interesting. I mean, I don't even know what else to say about it. The guy who ran with me, Brian Hassel, got a little freaked out. He didn't want to touch it. He said, that could be radioactive and your hands will fall off. I mean, he did not want it.
Are you still in touch with him?
Occasionally. It's kind of one of those crazy things. When you run side by side with someone for that long, we train together, we've been friends for long. I know everything about his life, so when we get together, it's like in 20 minutes I'm caught up again. We don't do it often, but he didn't have any part of that. He didn't want anything.
He didn't. Did he see you discover the glove?
No. We crossed. We were scheduled to meet after that, so I brought him back to show it to him.
But he did see it.
Oh, he saw it. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh my goodness! Well, there you go. I mean, because people think over the years that I've been hallucinating it, and I've been I quit smoking the heavy stuff many years ago, but and then of course some people think, well, it's Tim Beckley, so he just made it up. He's got nothing better to do. I mean, I sit here.
Very real, and there's a large number of people that did see it because I would show it to people in my my store. In your book, you don't quite give the entire name, but I called it 21st Century Foods. But it was a health store. Natural. It was the first vegetarian restaurant and health food store in the area, and so I would keep it in the restaurant there. And people would come in and they had heard about it because it did have some news media, and I again, not thinking the way I would today, I didn't keep those. But people would want to see it, and I'd show it to them, and literally it would freak people out, and they would leave the restaurant.
Wow, that's kind of Well, I don't know. I guess it's really vague to some people, I suppose.
Well, most people want, most people watch Star Trek and they watch, whatever, but they don't really want that to be real.
Yeah.
Other people want it to be real. I mean, I've always thought we cannot be egotistical enough to think that we are the only humanoid type beings on the planet. I mean, in the universe. On the planet, yeah, okay. But in the universe, think about the variety of people on our planet. And then expand that out over a few hundred light years away, or a few thousand. We have to have others that are very similar to us, more advanced, less advanced, not as nice, nicer.
Yeah.
I mean, they're out there.
Well, they would have obviously this. Whoever constructed this glove would have to be pretty close to us.
All right, Tim, let me interrupt you here because we have to go to our bottom of the hour break. We'll be back in just a few minutes.
Now back to exploring the bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal. Your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Final segment of Exploring the Bizarre. So, Harry, you've heard John's story here. Comments, questions?
Well, I've thought about several different things. I didn't know if the glove had a cuff or a gauntlet. The bladder, if there was any wires, tubes, or cords internally, or if the glove was designed to where if you roll it slightly inside out, it could be attached to a sleeve. I mean, it's like the size of hand sounds like a large with a small. If it had a descended thumb or no thumb at all, would tell me whether it was used for like a primate. Pardon me. The different things when he talked about the what would be perhaps the canopy or a shield or a window, and it's blue, and when you hold it to the light, it becomes clear. I've seen that. Like I've seen the outer canopy on an F-35, which isn't like anything we've done in recent times either. That's the latest thing, and it increases.
Oh, well, I think we've lost.
Oh, really?
I think we lost Harry there.
Silenced for sure. Yeah.
Well, we'll have to. Tino have to try to get him back on again. But
well, I've got to go through the files here to find the photographs. The problem is that some of these folders were made out of cardboard. And if you've had cardboard files for 40 or 50 years, you try to, they're so weighed down by the cardboard file on top of it that when you go to pull it open, it falls I
better
apart.
watch what I talk about.
Go ahead.
Since he asked those questions just before, let me see if I thought I had clarified that. First of all, there was a thumb. It was very prehensile. I would say, by comparison, it was at least 30% further up the hand than our own thumbs.
Mm.
The fingers were small but long. The bladder that he was talking about did have, as I had said earlier, it had a like a valve on the outside that you could put a connection into and air pressure in. It did have something similar to Velcro, so a spacesuit connection or a flight suit connection or whatever, but could wrap around and connect to it and, provide some connectivity. I obviously we don't think, the Velcro that we have would not hold up with pressure. But this one was much different. It was way more. There are new ones today, the heavy-duty plastic Velcro connections are similar to what that was, only it was more intense. I mean, I have to say, this thing was far advanced to what we even currently have now. However, what we have currently now is working towards that. It was very unique. I can't even really say that I don't dwell on it anymore, although I thought about it for a long time intensely, but there's rarely a day that goes by that this glove, I'll do anything, and all of a sudden it just pops into my mind how that glove would work. And to think about the components in that crash site, and it had to be a crash site.
Now, I have a John. I have something to bring up here. I asked you earlier whether anyone had tried to grab the glove, or whether you had ever been approached by somebody with the fake credentials. But you did have an experience traveling with the glove going back, where there was some other activity in the sky in a storm.
Yes. Yeah, there was definitely, well, actually, I pulled off on the side of I-10 because I had made this lineup and I knew exactly where it was. And I was going to zip over, get some of the components, and bring them back. There was how the area out, and in the book, Tim, you wrote California, but it was really Arizona, and I'm kind of glad you put California because it probably kept people from finding what I would love to find. However, looking up into the sky, there was definitely some things that would not be normal under any circumstance. My former wife saw a lot of that as well. In fact, I think, Tim, you even interviewed her about that. I was running
I do remember
back,
meeting her, yes.
Yeah. I was running to the site. I got really close to it. I saw all these things in the sky. It was really bizarre. And the winds came up incredibly to the point that it had not rained out in that desert in quite some time, but it didn't actually rain, although there was water in the air. It was like swirling water. I mean, it was really weird. And I turned around and went back because it just didn't seem like a safe environment to continue. It was very bizarre. Now, my ex had driven the motorhome, and she would go ahead of us in each set, and we would meet her there. So she was so freaked out when I got back looking at what was in the sky, and she had looked more in that because she wasn't running and avoiding. When you run across the desert, there are some things that will scratch the heck out of you. You have to be really careful when you're doing that. So I was paying more attention on the ground level. She was looking up at the sky level, and when she pointed it out to me, it was really awesome. I have to say that, there have been a lot of people over the years, even in this past year, who have said that there was an alien aircraft right outside and they tracked it. I mean, even during this past calendar year, I read some reports on pilots who are not weird, not messed up, and they said the same thing. So yes, there are. I mean, I've always thought that we had to have space encounters. I've always thought that.
Well, now this would indicate that there was some sort of a telepathic contact with you that they knew, or that they at least known, and I say they, whoever they are. I mean, it has, to me, it points to a parallel universe, because if you've got this a glove and it's been sitting there in the desert, we don't know exactly how long. They obviously are not going to race across the time and space to hover above you and perhaps indicate some idea that they might not like the fact that you have this. It would seem that they would have to come from somewhere closer, like they're reading your thoughts or picking up on something.
It felt that way. I can tell you that. The closer I got to where the glove and the other components were, the more intense the weather got. I can tell you that your mind's on about 4,000 things, and it's easier to sit back 40 years later and think about it than it is to experience it at the moment. But there was no doubt in my mind that there was a connection. I mean, it was too clear. It wasn't frightening by any stretch. I don't really have fear. Having flown fighters when I was 19, nothing freaks me out. I don't have that, thank God. But at the same time, I'm very aware of energy. Having started meditation when I was 11 and dealing with energy and that sort of thing. So when the energy would start to build, it was an interesting and intriguing experience, but the winds got up to a point where I did not feel comfortable being, the sand was whipping around, all kinds of things. Kind of like, if a helicopter were to fly over you and stir the winds. That was kind of how it felt on a magnitude level, although you didn't see anything. So it was definitely the parallel universe idea. Certainly is intriguing, and certainly has that has interest.
Well, some possibilities there. Harry, I don't know if I ever told you, but my one incident in Kingman. I mean, it wasn't involving a landed or a crashed UFO, but I was traveling out and happened to be getting off the highway, Route 66, right? And I was with my friend Cersei, who's been on the program, and we wanted to shop for Indian jewelry and all, right? So there are a few, what do you call them, outposts or places that sell Native American jewelry, and so we stopped in one. It was a very large, if I remember correctly, building that was painted entirely black on the outside. And we went in and we're looking just casually through the tumblestones, and they had a back room that had a lot of like Chiquina dolls and some other Native American artifacts and some saddles and things. It was quite a variety, and I think one of the largest outposts that I had ever been to like this. Anyway, we didn't really make any purchase, but we did. We got out of the heat and we stayed there for a little while, and there was nobody else in the place, so we happened to get into a conversation with the proprietor. Now, I don't know whether he was the manager, the owner, or anything else, but little by little, the conversation turned to the paranormal, and he told us this story. He said, this back room where you just were, there are people that claim that they have seen the spirits of Native Americans and so forth there, and we went along with it. He said, "Yeah, well, that's possible." And then I think at some point I happened to mention, well, my main interest was UFOs, not so much ghostly phenomena. And he went. I can't say that he went into a funk, but you could see that he was a little bit shaken or taken back with it. Now he told us, my friend and I, this story, and of course, there's no way to verify it. And this is 15, 20 years ago, so I didn't write down the details. I did take his card, but it has been lost, even though I've tried to find it. But he told me this story about how he had taken photographs of a craft, or had the photographs of a craft. I can't remember exactly how they came um, into his hands, but he had been, or he thought that he would be threatened, or had been threatened, and so he sent them to his brother, or someone related to him in some other state, because he felt that they might be taken out of his hands. Now, I just mentioned this because this was on the outskirts of Kingman, and of course, even before you and I conversed, or we met on Facebook, or on the radio. I was one of the few actually that took the Kingman incidents serious. I mean, I tried to do as much research as I could on the subject, and there really wasn't a great deal of available. I mean, looking on the internet or researching in the books, and it wasn't until I found you or heard you that I was kind of dumbfounded that you were probably the only one who had done any research on this a particular incident, which seemed to have more verification than most of the other episodes of this type. Had you ever heard of anybody in the neighborhood there who said that they had photographs or anything along that line?
Even I have photographs.
Okay.
Oh yeah. And for my own self, I moved here indirectly out of Alaska, where thinking of John, if he'd ever been in an Ironman, I ran one in Alaska, worldwide thing. But anyway, I got down here to get away from the snow and ice and all the UFOs that I was seeing, and my father had been seeing for years and never bothered to tell me about, and until one day, and became friends with the old timers. And being that I've interviewed people for over 40 years in regards to one historical topic after another, I started doing that and gained the confidence and trust for real of some Century family people who've been here since the before time, before the military was here, and when the military was here, and they had blackouts and quasi-martial law and everything all the way through World War II. And nobody, even today's archaeologist who's related to all these people at the BLM, nobody tells outsiders very much. If you do, you get chastised and basically drummed out of the family. And it all stems from a man, a rancher that came up from the Big Sandy in 1882. And there's a lot of relatives interconnected that way. And so I started hearing these things go to a luncheon, a small kind of private luncheon. And I started hearing these things. And so I started asking it. And they told me a lot of things nobody gets to hear. Like a city attorney said, well, I was the city attorney in Kingman for 10 years. Nobody ever told me a thing. Nobody would. I wouldn't, it's like, for a lot of reasons. But I started hearing things about, sometimes these people, because they could fit in on the street with us right now. We're on the street sometimes right then, and I'm talking about the strange looking men. And one evening, out the back of my property, it's 35 miles of open desert, okay? And I've got this thing hovering, and I took a picture of it with a fixed focus camera, and I have a call from a lady that's into this and works on a lot of things. There's even a thing in New York here just happened. and from England, and she's trying to talk to somebody else who's an astronomer here. And so she's actually in England, patched to both of us. And so we're intercommunicating through somebody in England. And the photograph I took of this craft, and I didn't know what exactly it looked like until I could actually look at the photo and blow it up on a monitor to see it. It's really spooky. But the astronomer got it for 20 minutes. Okay. And I just took a single shot. But I've had my security systems since finding the landing site. Oh, and the chap who developed the most advanced flight control ROV system in the world, engineer for James Cameron's Mariana Trench dive, he stopped his work and came up to fly a drone for me with my cameras at the landing site and at one of the two crash sites. I found it. Okay, there'd been a museum curator, spent 20 years looking for this place, and he had inside information for real from a man who formed a church and became an ordained minister to counsel Area 51 workers way back when to avoid government interference. And so this guy shared that with the museum aviation curator, okay? And so here it is out there all the time. We couldn't find it. Well, I couldn't read the ground terrain because in the last 15 or 20 years, we've had more moisture. So you have the desert grows instantly the minute there's rain because it can't get it again. And so we got more ground cover. And so I couldn't see anything well enough to determine. So doing the overflights, so the engineer came, we did all that stuff. And I immediately found where this craft had hit a rocky butte, ricocheted off of it, went 0.21 miles, and augured into the desert floor at what's called Red Lake. That's the number 21, May 22, 1953. And that's the first time I ever saw what people are now calling Heidi Hollis. By the way, I guess I wrote a book on it called Shadow Beings. I didn't know about that until I saw it. And I was worried because I could be cut off to my Jeep, which was miles away, and I was loaded with equipment on the side of a rocky butte. Anyway, after finding the landing site, both the engineer, who went back to his job, and then later they did the Mariana Trench thing, and he's in a ship above, and Cameron went down and all that stuff. After he got a craft over his house. He doesn't live where I live, okay? And I go out back and I got this thing low, right at sunset, and it came across the valley floor. I have mountains 6 miles from me and a valley I'm in, 9 miles to the west, 6 miles to the east. It's beautiful, okay? This thing came, and I ran in and got a camera. I watched it for 5 minutes. And I came back out and it was gone, but it wasn't. It had moved. It was close. And it made kind of a horseshoe cut to the north and back around and come right over what I call my backyard. And it just stopped there. And it's triangular. And the thing rotated. And it didn't, for John there, it didn't fly. It slid like a hockey puck on ice, okay?
Right.
No sound.
Harry, unfortunately, I'm going to have to interrupt you here because we're almost at the end of the program. But why don't you let our listeners know just real quick where they can find more about you? Your website, books, things like that.
www.kingmanufocrashers.com, and I'm on Facebook.
And how about you, John? Facebook?
Yes, I am on Facebook, just under my name, John PEELE. And I don't really talk very much about this, although I find it very intriguing and it certainly is interesting. I have a certain group of people that ask me questions all the time, but for the general public, I don't post it on Facebook.
Yeah.
However, you may be right. Maybe we should, because the reality is very simple. There are others around us and some of us are aware that they're here.
You
And maybe
you certainly may have the proof if anybody does. Anyway, I'll be posting some photographs, and I am going to look for the missing prints that I have. And of course, you can find one or two photographs in the book that I did called "The Case for UFO Crashes from Urban Legend to Reality." The earlier edition was the Riddle of Hangar 18. And don't forget our YouTube channel, Mr. UFO's Secret Files. And Harry and John and Tim and Tina and Peter, good night to one and all, and keep looking up and running.
Very good, sir.
Happy trails.
You've been listening to Exploring the Bizarre with hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz. They're taking back the night by jetting non-stop across the cosmos in search of the truly bizarre and totally unexplained, with you as their co-pilot. Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. For more information on Exploring the Bizarre and hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz, check out their KCOR Digital Radio Network page. Follow their YouTube channel at MRUFO 1100, Exploring the Bizarre.